Hello everybody and welcome back to another thrilling episode of Newbie Tries to Put Together a Warhammer Model. Today we'll be looking at how to assemble an Assault Intercessor. So these are the good guys apparently, and we can see that there's some information in our recruit manual that shows us how to assemble these guys. Building your first miniature, it's always a good place to start. And we can see that with the Space Marines there are a couple more parts than you get with a Necron. We have two body parts and a head. We have the two arms, and then we have the backpack. And the idea obviously is to extract these progressively from the sprue and assemble the model. Now, just to reiterate, I did the last commentary on the Necrons, but it's the same approach here in terms of how I remove the parts from the sprue, rotating it in such a way that I can get the flat blade of the cutters out to sever the part, and I make sure that if there is a taper on the projection that connects to it, that is running towards myself. That allows me to have better control over the closing of the jaws, so it tends not to slip down towards the model. I don't like to cut adjacent to the plastic of the model part that we need, because it tends to pluck out some of the plastic as it goes white, discolors as you crush it, because the clippers aren't particularly super sharp. So it tends to be better to err on the side of caution, leave a little bit left behind so that there will be a little bit of a tab that then needs to be cleaned up with the hobby knife, which you can then progressively just trim away bit by bit. And you can certainly see that there are some parts left. And unfortunately, particularly with the backpack section, you'll notice that the sort of projections happen to be on the spherical ends, which are the most sort of critical with regards to trying to maintain the shape and not emphasize that there was a section there that has been cut off. So other parts like underneath elbows or on the side of the rib or something like that, that's easy to deal with, or on a flat section on the actual blade. But unfortunately, yes, on certain parts it's a little bit harder to deal with, but it's certainly something that you can with practice do, trimming it away and then shaving it with the sort of the flat edge of the blade to scrape it down and try and get it as smooth as possible. There will also be the need to deal with mold lines. Some are more obvious than others. Clearly you want to have that done. You might miss some, and unfortunately you might need to go back and readdress those, but it's still a worthwhile exercise. Depends on how close you want to be looking at it, but clearly you need to look at it relatively closely to paint the thing, and it depends on how good your eyesight is, but it's definitely something that I would recommend. And so it takes a little bit of time. This isn't a race. Now, I did mention in the last video with regards to the Necrons, I found that the projections, the shafts that press into the sockets that are used because there's no glue required, tend to be either sometimes a bit too fat or a bit too long, and limit your capacity to actually push the two models together. And so I've found it advantageous to shave them down by either grinding them a little bit around the circumference and or cutting the ends off to shorten them, to ensure that you're able to push together the parts and not have a gap between the joints, which looks a bit unsightly. So that's always something that I'd recommend that you do prior to trying to then push it together, because you'll find that you'll get 3/4 the way there, and that is as far as you can get, which is a bit annoying. And then you've got to somehow try and back it out and fix it so that you can put it back together again. So I learnt from experience that it's best to do it on all of them, just on the off chance, particularly with the backpacks and pushing the bodies together with the Assault Intercessors. So once we've got at least finally everything then pushed in place, we have our complete model. As you can see, with having the shafts for the arms, we can actually pose or position them slightly differently, because there's a bit of variation that's afforded by the fact that it can rotate on that shaft up and down slightly, so you're not rigidly fixed. I haven't actually glued any of the arms together. Might make it easy to paint when the time comes, but we'll soon find out. But ultimately there is one complete intercessor. Now there's just a few little other bits and pieces. Obviously mold lines, they're something that's a bit of an issue with certain parts that you find. They're not everywhere, it's not consistent on every component, but certainly you'll see it on the tops of some of the weapons, and it's just a matter of dragging either your hobby knife or some other implement across those to just take them down slightly so they're not as obvious, because they probably will show up when you come around to do the painting, particularly if you're using something like a speed paint or something like that that tends to accumulate around high points. So we certainly don't want to emphasize that. So we'll take those mold lines off as such, and then what we finally need to do obviously is drill out the barrel. So what I found with the Marines is I generally start with a 0.8. With the Necrons it was 0.6, but I start with a slightly larger one because it appears that the barrels on the weapons are a larger diameter, so you've got a little bit more leeway. Again, just making sure that you start centrally and at least making a mark to start with, and then checking to ensure that you are in the middle of the part, so that we don't end up with the risk of drilling out the side of the barrel accidentally or making it look offside, because that'll look just as bad as not drilling it out. And once you're happy with the location, then it's a matter of just continuing to deepen the hole sufficiently that it looks like it's a continuous barrel. And once you've done that, I then progress from the 0.8 millimeter up to 1.2. I only went as far as 0.8 on the Necrons, so it is a slightly larger opening that you're creating here. But once you've got your pilot hole, it's pretty straightforward just to get the larger drill, insert in there and ream it out to the larger diameter without too much risk of accidentally taking out the side of the barrel. And then you can happily go, there we have a functioning weapon that is a bit more presentable. So that's always a good way to get this. Clearly there are 5 intercessors that need to be assembled, one of which is the Assault Intercessor Sergeant, who is a slightly more complicated construction. There are a couple of options as well. Option A is the heavy bolt pistol, option B is the plasma pistol and the chainsword. And while the recruit manual suggests that you build him with the heavy bolt pistol, I decided to go with the plasma pistol and chainsword because he looked a little bit more dynamic. And therefore there's a couple of different parts that you need. With this one here you have 2 different chest options, one with a shield, one without. And there's a piece that actually sockets in to the body, which is like part of the belt, and it either has the chainsword if he is just using the bolt pistol, or it has his helmet, because when you do him with the plasma pistol and the chainsword, he has his helmet off and his face is exposed. So that's something you've got the option of playing with. And as I said, I went with the plasma pistol chainsword, and so he had his helmet. And you notice that you definitely have to get that sorted first, because you can't press the 2 components together until that is complete. And once then you have squeezed him together completely, we can see that the mold lines do look a little bit better. That inserted piece doesn't look awesome around the chest, but it's about the best you can get. The backpack, as we can see here, it's a little bit of a faff to get on. It's definitely a little bit tighter than it needs to be, clearly, so definitely could benefit from being shaved down a little, as we mentioned previously. So the arms, straightforward exercise. I've only had an issue with one arm that was a little bit tight, but they generally work better than the bodies going together and the backpacks. So we just put his arms on. They can be sort of positioned slightly. You'll feel that they start to rotate out away from the body if you go too far. So you've got probably about 45 degrees of options with regards to the posing. And then once he's all done, stick him onto a base, a similar sort of hexagonal sort of shaft on the bottom of the foot, pushes into the socket in the base, and there we have one Assault Intercessor Sergeant who's going to cop a headshot. Now, as we mentioned with the Assault Intercessor Sergeant, there's a few bits and pieces left over. Once he's fully assembled, you have the chest piece, you have two other helmets, one with a skull on it, one without, the chest piece without the shield. You have the chainsword, which is part of the belt, the free pointing hand, and also the pistol. And so whether you can use them on another model is anyone's guess, but after a few little trials and tribulations, we were able to piece together our little group of 5 Assault Intercessors, and got them all assembled, and they look quite smart. And it's just a matter now of, again, getting them primed and painted and on a base, and hopefully we'll look at that quite shortly. So again, thanks everyone for persisting with this, how to suck eggs and put a model together. But it's just an exercise for me to go through and understand how it all works, and hopefully some people might garner some useful information out of it if they are on the same journey as myself. So until then, we'll see you again. Thank you.